operations. And most of you think of order of operations as PEMDAS, right? You've heard it as PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Some of you have heard that. There's a reason that I wrote it the way that I did. The P means parentheses. I like to think of it more as GEMDAS, in that it's really not just parentheses, it's actually any groupings whatsoever. So we call it parentheses, but in actuality, it's any groupings at all. So if you have brackets or absolute values or anything like that, those would be done first. So try and think of it in terms of groupings more than just parentheses. If you have more than one grouping in an equation, look at that, I totally spelled that wrong. I just caught it. Operations. If you have more than one grouping, you start from the innermost grouping and you work your way out. The E stands for exponents. So the first thing we would deal with is parentheses or groupings, and then we would move on to exponents. Right? For anyone who doesn't remember, that's something being raised to a power. So x squared, that square, that 2 up there would be the exponent. When we talk about multiplication and division, the reason that I wrote them this way is that multiplication and division all the time, because when we spell PEMDAS, the M comes first and it makes everyone think that multiplication is first. Multiplication is not first. It is done to whatever one comes first, reading from left to right. So if you have a division before your multiplication, reading from left to right, you would do the division first. All right, so we'll talk multiplication, mult, and div, right? Multiplication and division is read from left to right, whichever comes first. This is also true of addition and subtraction, right? You're going to do whatever comes first, reading from left to right. So your first thing is always going to be parentheses, whatever's in your groupings. Then you're going to deal with your exponents. Then you're going to do multiplication and division, whichever one shows up first, right? Just in the order that you see them. And addition and subtraction in the order that you see them. When we talk about exponents, you might not think of square roots as an exponent, but they are. The square root or the third root of anything is just, so if I have a square root, that's like saying x to the 1/2 power. So that would be considered an exponent. If I have a cube root, right? So I have a 3 right here. That would be equals x to the 1/3 power. So square roots are also exponents. So when you're looking at something like that, try and remember that would be in the exponent position. I think the best way to go over order of operations is to just do some crazy problems and have you see how it all works, right? So I'm going to start with something a little more simple. If we have 29 minus parentheses 11 minus 2 cubed plus 6 squared divided by 4. We're going to do this in that PEMDAS order. And if we look at this now, we can see that right in here is our, sorry about that. I don't know how I did that. Right in here is our parentheses, right? We're going to deal with what's inside the parentheses. P does not relate to what's going outside the parentheses, only what is inside. So we're going to deal with this first. So I'm going to go 29 minus, and we're going to deal with what's in here. I have 11 minus 2 cubed. Well, that would be 11 minus 8 plus 6 squared. We'll keep that divided by 4. And then we're just going to combine those. So I would have 29 minus 8 minus 11. 11 minus 8 is 3. Plus 6 squared divided by 4. I'm showing you every step. You don't necessarily have to show every step like this, but so we've dealt with what's going on in the parentheses. This negative outside of the parentheses is not something we're dealing with yet. So now we're going to move on to exponents, and we only have one of those. So we would go to dealing with this next, right? So we would just rewrite this. 29 minus 3. I could take it out of the parentheses now. Plus 6 squared. Well, that's plus 36 divided by 4. And this is where we get into now. We've done the parentheses. Our groupings are taken care of. Our exponents are taken care of. There's nothing else written to a power. And so now we're going to do multiplication and division in the order that we see it. We are not going to do anything before we do multiplication and division. There's only one division component, so it would be 29 minus 3, and then we have 36 divided by 4. 36 divided by 4 is 9, so we're going to go plus 9. And then we can just add and subtract in the order we see it. 29 minus 3 is 26. Excuse me. Plus 9 is 35. This would be our final answer. And this wasn't too tough of a question because we didn't have a ton of groupings or anything in that problem. But we're going to now move to one that's a little bit harder. We're going to look at let's do a pen that shows up better. 7 minus parentheses the absolute value of 10 minus 12 absolute value plus 5 squared and parentheses all over 9 minus 2 squared. So before I told you that when we're dealing with groupings, when we're dealing with parentheses, we go to the innermost grouping first. And here I have these parentheses, but I have a grouping within that parentheses, right? So I'm going to look at this part first, right? I'm going to look at this 10 minus 12 and the absolute value. So 10 minus 12 is negative 2, but the absolute value of negative 2 is just 2, right? So if I'm looking just at this absolute value, I get 2. Now I'm going to deal with this other part in the parentheses, which is plus 5 squared. And 5 squared is just 25, right? These are all in the parentheses now, right? And so I can go ahead and just add those together right off. And so what I'm left with so far is I'm left with 7 minus 27, over 9 minus 2 squared. And so the next thing that I would want to do is deal with this 2 squared. Right, so I'm going to be left with 7 minus 27 over 9 minus 2 squared. Well, that would be 9 minus 4. And now that we're just dealing with subtraction up here and subtraction down here, we can rewrite that. 7 minus 27 is negative 20. 9 minus 4 is 5. I would have to reduce that fraction because both of those are divisible by 5. And I would be left with 20 divided by 5, which is negative 4. And so the whole purpose of this is to understand how those order of operations work. And I did put some difficult ones into your homework. because I really want you to kind of master this a little bit. I'm going to do one more crazy one. It feels like it's the most problematic one that I have on my example sheet. I keep making my paper too thin, or my hand keeps touching it. I'm left-handed. It's rough being a lefty. So let's look at example number 3. We'll go with the absolute value of 15 minus parentheses. Sorry, that's not an absolute value. That's a bracket. Minus parentheses, absolute value -6 plus 2. End of the absolute value. Keep in mind these are not ones, they're absolute value symbols. Plus the square root of 9. And parentheses and bracket. Square the whole thing over 3 minus 3 cubed. This is a crazy problem, and the reason I wanted to do this is it has every bit of what you might see, right? And we're going to deal with the innermost part first, right? We're going to deal with what is inside the innermost part of this grouping, right? Because we have a grouping here, and then we have this parentheses grouping in that, and then inside that we have another grouping. And so we're going to deal with the innermost grouping first, which would be this right here. We have -6 plus 2. Now -6 plus 2 is just -4, but we're taking the absolute value of that, and the absolute value is just a distance from 0 on the number line, which means it's only 4 away. So this gives us +4. So in this first grouping, we're left with 4 plus the square root of 9. And the square root of 9, if you remember correctly, I said is an exponent, but we're going to deal with it first anyways because it's within the grouping, the next grouping. So we're going to say 3 times 3 equals 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. So we have 3 plus 3 inside there, right? Now this is our next grouping, right? So what are we looking at now? I've dealt with this whole grouping right here, right? It's giving us that 4 plus 3 raised to the square. So let's rewrite what we've got. We've got 15 minus 4 plus 3, right, which is 7, times the bracket squared over 3 minus 3 cubed, right? And so I still have to deal with what is inside this. I can't get it to 100. I can never just get it where that's close enough. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this 15 minus 7 because it is still within a bracket, right? We dealt with everything in this bracket. All we were left with was 7. Now we've got to deal with this part of the bracket. So 15 minus 7 is 8. And we're talking about 8 squared. And we'll still deal with 3 minus 3 cubed. Now everything inside our groupings are taken care of. There's nothing going on inside the grouping, so we can move on to exponents. Our first exponent we get is 8 squared. Well, that's 8 times 8, which is 64. Then we have 3 minus 3 cubed. Well, that's 27. So we have 64 over 3 minus 27. Well, 3 minus 27 is just -24. We cannot leave it in this form because those are both even numbers. It means they're both divisible by at least 2. I know they're both divisible by 4. This would be -16 over 6. Those are each divisible by 2. We'd have -8 thirds. And I can't reduce it any further than that. I will not be super particular about reducing fractions unless you have an even number over an even number, in which case reduce it, right? At least divide both of them by 2. So that is the hardest PEMDAS type question you're going to come across. Work on it, play with it. I'm tempted to actually put all the answers on PowerSchool for these because it's your work I want to see. I want to see that you can get there. I'll have to think on that one a little bit. The next portion that you're going to have to do is what we call evaluating expressions. And when we talk about evaluating an expression, it just means we're putting in a value for those missing numbers, for those variables, so that we can solve it. Right? So if I have the expression, what did I leave off on? Number 3 there. Let's call this one number 4. If I have the expression a times b squared over c plus 12, and I want you to evaluate this expression, right? So evaluate when a equals 3, b equals -4, and c equals 8. All that means is in this expression right here, it's an expression, not an equation, because it doesn't have an equal sign in it, right? All I have to do is where I have a, plug in 3, where I have b, plug in -4, and where I have c, plug in 8. So we can go, a is 3, so we have 3 times b, which is -4. I am putting this -4 in parentheses so that I know I have to square the negative. C is 8 plus the 12 that's already there. And now I can evaluate the expression because I know the numerical values. And I still need to use my PEMDAS, which means I am going to deal with this exponent first. So I have 3 times -4 squared. Well, -4 squared is saying -4 times -4, which is positive 16. Over 8 plus 12, which is 20. And then we've got 3 times 16 is 48 over 20. And we're going to reduce that fraction. I know everything here is divisible by 4. This would be 16 over, I'm sorry, not 16, 12 over 5. And that would be your final answer. So that's all it means to evaluate an expression. It means put in those values. And then you're going to use the same PEMDAS that you did for your order of operations before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm not going to do any more examples of putting it in because I think you guys can figure out when you see A, you put in whatever A is equal to. And I kind of want to see how you guys work out the problems. It'll give me a little idea of your arithmetic abilities right there. The only other part you're going to have to deal with is simplifying your expressions, which means writing them in the simplest form you can using combining like terms and distribution and things like that. So your first example would be here's number 6 is what we're on. Let's look at 16x minus 11 minus 7x plus 10. Sorry, my handwriting will get better on this thing as we go, I promise. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to combine our like terms, right? We're going to look at things that can be combined, which means any x term can be combined with another x term. So we've got 16x minus 7x. Notice we don't have parentheses. We don't have exponents. We don't even have multiplication and division going on in here. So we're just dealing with addition and subtraction from left to right. So we have 16x plus 7x. That is going to give me 23x. I have negative 11 plus 10. That's just negative 1. And that's as far as we can really go with that, right? I don't know why I did 23. This is not a negative right here. I take that back. I was trying to do negative 16. 16x minus 7x is not 23. It is 9x minus 1. It is late in the day. I apologize, although that is an excuse because I could make that same mistake at any time during the day. If we are looking at, let's say we have 6 parentheses c minus 2 minus 8c plus 1. Before we can solve this, we have to deal with our distribution. And when we're doing that, it means I have to take this and multiply it times c, right? I'd have 6 times c, which is just 6c. Here I would distribute this to the 2, and I would have 6 times negative 2, which is negative 12. When we look at this minus right here, that is like multiplying times negative 1 for each of these, and it's going to change the sign of everything within this parentheses, right? So this is like saying negative 1 times 8c, which is negative 8c. And this is like saying negative 1 times 1, which is just negative 1. And now we can go ahead and combine those like terms. So anything with a c value, right, can be combined. So I have 6c minus 8c. That gives me negative 2c. And then now I just have numbers left, right? So I have minus 12 minus 1, which is negative 13. So you're still going to need to use your order of operations when you're dealing with evaluating, when you're dealing with simplifying expressions. Your homework worksheet should be posted. If you have any questions, please drop into the Google Meets during the meet hours. Use paper, carrier pigeon, whatever. If you need help, make sure I know so that I can help you out. Beyond that, I'll end this here. And if you need me, all my info is on PowerSchool, so you should be able to find me.